church.
Couple of things to remind you about before we get into the lesson this morning. Please remember that next Sunday will be our Orphans Sunday. We'll be taking up that yearly special contribution to support Orphans Lifeline. As we've talked about, they do an incredible work all over the world, caring for children who truly are orphans. They have nobody to care for them at all. They're looking at death or slavery or something if someone doesn't intervene. And they do a wonderful, wonderful work. That will be taking place next Sunday. Also, there's lots of needs right now. Charlie's Pantry needs to be filled. If you can help with that, you can give a check to Charlie. Coats for kids, there's a box out in the foyer. And if you would like to donate a coat for a child, you can do that. Our prison ministry, lots of male and female prisoners are being released because of a change in laws. And we would like to be able to provide a change of clothes for those folks. If you can help with that, then you need to see Henry or Cheryl. So there's all kinds of opportunities right now to make a difference in people's lives and share the blessings that we enjoy. Also remember, this evening our Connect groups will be meeting, and tonight we'll be talking about how we're exalted when we're humbled. And that is certainly a paradox, because in this day and age, you don't see a lot of people being interested really in being humbled, far more in being exalted. But Scripture clearly teaches that it's when we're humbled that we're exalted. And we'll be talking about that this evening. If you're not in a Connect group, sure encourage you to participate in one. We started talking about raising whole kids in a broken world a couple of weeks ago. Last week, we introduced the idea of the importance of teaching our children to treat others with respect. And we put emphasis, first of all, on how important it is that we respect God. And then we talked about how important it is that we teach respect for parents as well. Today, I want to continue that theme with a couple of more very important areas, I believe, for us to emphasize to our children when it comes to teaching them respect. And the first one of these is respect for the elderly. I'd like to begin by noticing some passages of Scripture that speak to this. The first one from Leviticus 19 and verse 32. You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man. And you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. How often today do you see people stand up when someone enters the room? Isn't it an increasingly rare thing to happen? Generally, when the President of the United States enters a room, everybody will stand. That still happens for the most part. When a judge comes into the courtroom, everybody will be commanded to stand when the judge comes in. Outside of that, it's an increasingly rare thing, and I think that's unfortunate. Because standing is a way of acknowledging and honoring someone. And that's exactly what the Lord is teaching here in the law. That we should honor those who are older, show them respect physically by standing when they come before you. Another passage out of Proverbs chapter 16, verse 31, where Solomon will emphasize gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. Solomon's going to spend a lot of time talking about wisdom in the book of Proverbs. He'll talk about it over 45 times. He'll mention wisdom. And he will tie it very often to the experience that goes in life. It is important that we see gray hair as a crown of glory. Now, somewhere along the line, we've lost that, haven't we? And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But it's a shame that we don't honor the gray head as we once did. And in 1 Peter 5, verse 5, as Peter there talks to elders, and now he's talking to the brethren, he says, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders, the presbyteroi. The word presbyteros, older man, was used of somebody. If you go back and try to look up and see, when do they begin to define older? Well, you have to understand, people didn't live all that long back then. And so you were an older man, considered to be an older man, somewhere around late 40s is when they started to consider you to be an elder. But the emphasis here is on the fact that with age comes wisdom. That's why God gives the church elders, not youngers. Okay? Because there is wisdom to be found in the accumulated years of life. Now, whoops, I didn't mean to go there yet. Let me come back to this. As we talk about respect for the elderly, some of you, not all of you, some of you are going to remember the decade of the 60s and the early 70s. And you'll remember how things changed during that time. To me, Carol and I were dating during that time and married during that time. And overall, culturally, I think, just my opinion, it was a real downer. Movies were bleak. Music was bleak. Everything had a tendency to be kind of bleak back then. This country was fighting an internal battle over our participation in the war in Vietnam. There was all kinds of bitterness, all kinds of rancor, all kinds of demonstrations going on. It was a period that sociologists call a period of anomie. Now, anomie occurs in a culture when that culture is reevaluating, may move toward disintegration, may not. But it's a period when kind of everything is just tossed up in the air. And values change and means change and all that kind of thing. And that definitely happened in the 60s and the 70s. It was during that time that this meme started of don't trust anybody over the age of 30. If they're over the age of 30, don't trust them. And that was rooted in this idea that it was the older generation that had got us into Vietnam, that had got us rooted in all these international conflicts, and so you can't trust the older heads anymore. The younger heads, we've got to change things. That's when all of that really got going. And what's unfortunate is, in the midst of all of that, I think we've lost sight of just how important older age and the wisdom that goes with that is. And consequently, with that, respect for the elderly, which is very, very important. In most cultures, even today, the elderly are respected in a way that they are not in our Western culture. Because people understand that with age comes wisdom. And let me delve into that a little farther because I think it's really, really important. You can be 16 and be brilliant. I've known some 16-year-olds that were just smarter than whips, and they were capable of doing all kinds of things. But a person who's also smarter than a whip and really sharp and is now 56 or 66 or 76 is going to have a lot more wisdom than a 16-year-old. That's just a fact. Why? Because they've got 40 or 50 or 60 years of living under their belts. And that makes a huge difference. When you're 16, there's not a whole lot of life experience that you can consider because you haven't had a whole lot of life yet. By the time you're 46 or 56 or 66 or 76, you've had decades of life under your belt against which you can put what you know and evaluate that. And I believe those humps and bumps in life and those experiences in life are what produce in us what we call wisdom. And you simply don't have that fabric at a younger age that you do at an older age, and that is invaluable. And here's what breaks my heart, is that so often now, older folks aren't being listened to because they're not respected. And in the process of that, a lot of wisdom is being lost. And a lot of mistakes are being repeated that don't need to be repeated. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I started preaching fresh out of school, it was a little town called Huckabee in the hill country of central Texas. It was southwest of Fort Worth a ways. Dairy country. There are a lot of dairies there then. One of the members of the church there was named Mike Smith. Mike was an old cowboy, literally an old rancher. All his life, he raised and traded cattle. That's what he did for a living. Mike and Irene were wonderful to Carol and I. They were like grandparents. They were in their 80s at that time, and just the sweetest, finest couple. Mike was known as the mayor of Huckabee, and you'd have to see Huckabee of all 10 houses that were there to understand the irony of that. But I loved to visit with Mike, loved to listen to him reminisce about the old days. And I'll never forget this particular incident, which I think is going to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is early 70s, and I don't know how many of you remember, but there was a time when dairy products and dairy cattle spiked in price, and things just became really, really expensive. And calves were selling at that time for the unknown price of $100, just unimaginable. And all the cattle were really, really expensive. And a lot of the young dairymen in that area were buying everything they could buy because milk was up and cattle were going up. And I remember distinctly Mike saying, I've seen this before. These kids are making a mistake. The bottom is going to fall out of this. It's happened again and again. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a trailer, and I'm going to load every cow I can on that trailer, and I'm going to sell every head of cattle I can. And he did. And sure enough, it wasn't very long, and the bottom fell out of the market. And Mike made a ton of money, and a bunch of very, very smart, hard-working young men lost their dairies because they didn't have that fabric of time to place their decisions against. They hadn't been through that like Mike had. There's no substitute for living life. There's no substitute for going through the ups and downs and the humps and bumps that go with living. You learn in the process of that some very, very important lessons. And what breaks my heart is if we don't teach our children to respect the older generation, they're not going to listen to the older generation. And in the process of that, they're going to lose a lot of wisdom and make a lot of mistakes that otherwise they wouldn't make. When I moved to Sunset to preach there, one of the first things that I did was get on the phone and call about 4 older men who had preached for large churches for a long time. And I asked all 4 of them the same question: what in the world am I going to do? Guide me, help me. And they all did. And it was invaluable, the wisdom and the guidance that they gave to me. There were a number of landmines that I probably would have stepped on, mistakes that I would have made that I didn't, because they warned me about them and helped me to plot out a path to begin a ministry at a large church like that. There is so much benefit to be gained from wisdom, and if our kids don't respect the source of that wisdom, they're not going to seek it, and we shortchange them when that happens. One of the greatest gifts that you can give your children is to teach them to respect older folks, because when they respect them, they'll listen to them. And there's a world of wisdom and guidance to be gained from that. Now, another very important aspect of what we need to teach our children is in regard to respect for those in positions of authority. In Romans chapter 13, verse 7, Paul writes this: pay to all, listen to him, what's owed to them. This is a debt, folks. What is owed to them. Taxes, to whom taxes are owed. Revenue, to whom revenue is owed. Respect, to whom respect is owed. Honor, to whom honor is owed. Now, Paul makes it very clear that we owe not just taxes and revenue, we owe respect and honor. Somewhere along the way, that's been forgotten. But it's true. There are those who have earned our respect, and we owe it to them. There are those who have earned the right to be honored, and we owe that to them. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17, Peter writes, honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. fear God, honor the emperor. Do you know who the emperor was at that time? Nero. Do you know what a mess Nero was? The damage that Nero did? And yet Peter is saying, honor the emperor. Why? Because you're honoring the office, brothers and sisters. You're honoring the position and the power that's represented by that position. It doesn't make any difference who's filling that position at the time. You're honoring the position because the position is vitally important. Keep going too quick here. It is so important that we teach our children to honor those who are in positions of authority. I don't know about you, but boy, it hurts me when I listen to the news and I hear people talk about our police and call them pigs and celebrate when one of them is killed. I just hate that, because that shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the incredibly important role that those people play. I mentioned earlier the 60s and the 70s. I remember when our young men began to come home from Vietnam, they didn't pick that fight. They didn't ask to go to that war. They went over there, got shot up, tore up, many of them killed, came home to people spitting in their faces, people calling them baby killers and murderers. Remember that? And that was awful. I worked with a man fresh out of Vietnam, came back to work at Ralston Purina, where I was working. Bitter? Oh, he was bitter. He was bitter because he put his life on the line, and he came home, and in the airport, he had people literally spitting on him. Now, there's a fundamental misunderstanding, brethren, that's reflected in that scares me to death. Because here's what people don't understand who take that kind of position. Do you realize the fine line that exists in our society today, and I'm serious, between order and chaos? They call the police the thin blue line. One of those thin blue lines that separate order and chaos are those people who every day put their lives on the line to protect you and me. And they need to be and deserve to be respected for what they do, honored for what they do. Because the job that they have taken on means that they are, folks, there are wolves out there. Wolves. And they'll eat you, and they'll eat me. And the only thing standing between those wolves and you and me are those people who are sworn to protect us. And if you remove them, if you denigrate them, you remove that which keeps order and structure in this society, which keeps us from falling into chaos. And if you think we're close now, and we are in many ways, you just wait. If we keep on denigrating those whose responsibility it is to protect us and to keep order, if we keep stripping them of the ability to do that, we haven't seen anything yet. We owe them respect. We owe them honor. Now, probably every single solitary one of us can tell stories about jerks who wear uniforms. That doesn't mean that everyone that wears a uniform is a jerk. It means there are exceptions to every rule. But the last thing our kids need to hear is for us to be denigrating those who are keeping this society as structured as it is, and you as protected as you are. I don't like to have to worry about whether or not, did I lock the doors when I left? I don't like it that we have to treat this building increasingly during the week as kind of a fortress. And to get to Janet, you know, you've got to go through locked doors and all that to get in there. But to protect her, and just with common sense, because the wolves are out there, that's what has to be done. Now again, those people who want to denigrate them and put them down, fine. You strip them out of here and let's see what happens. We must honor those who are in positions of authority. Now, let me carry this over and not just talk about military and police and so on. Let's talk for a second about teachers in the schoolroom. We've got a lot of teachers. And I've listened to them ache and hurt over the disrespect that they see increasingly in the classroom from some of their students, about the difficulties that they have with keeping order in the classroom. You can have 20 or 25 kids. How many does it take to make your life a nightmare in there? One? And if you've got a couple of three, bless your hearts. And here's the thing. They steal the education from all the other kids. That's what breaks my heart, is that my children don't get the education they could because these two or three are allowed to disrupt everything. Because they haven't been taught to respect anybody, including their teachers. And look at the horrible cost that our culture pays, that society pays, that our children pay. I was in 8th grade in Benton. At that time, we had grades 1 through 8 and then 9 through 12. You're in grade school and then you went to high school. So I was top dog. I was in 8th grade, Benton grade school. And we had a young woman come in who was our music teacher. I mean, she was fresh out of college. This was her first job. She might have been 21, 22 years old. She wasn't any older than that. And so she was probably only about 10 years older, 8 to 10 years older than we were. She loved music. She loved and wanted to teach us music. We had this kid in my class named Dick. And Dick decided that he was going to make her cry. He bragged to us. He told us, I'm going to make her cry. And so he worked at it, and he worked at it, and sure enough, I'll never forget the day that she just folded up, covered her eyes, and ran out of the classroom crying because he had made her life so miserable. He ruined a teacher. She came back to the classroom. She finished out the year, but she was a ghost of what she had been. You could tell her heart wasn't in it anymore. She was just marking time until she could fulfill a contract and get out of there. And all of us felt robbed because this vibrant, lovely young woman who so wanted to share was a shell of what she'd been, courtesy of one self-centered little jerk. But it happens, and it shouldn't. And it's a tragedy when it does. And we have a responsibility as parents to make sure that when we raise our children, we raise them to respect those in positions of authority. To make what they do a joy and a blessing and not a trial. Now, how do we teach our children to respect others? I would suggest, first of all, by modeling respect for others before them. Again, that old saw, the apple never falls very far from the tree, is absolutely true. If you want your children to respect other people, you've got to respect other people. Your kids are going to act like you. They're going to mimic you. How do you speak of those in positions of authority? Do you speak of them with respect? Or do you denigrate them? If you do, don't expect your children to think any other way or act any other way, because they are going to reflect your attitude. When I was preaching in Portales, there was a man there who just all the time, whenever he had an opportunity, he would run down our elders. So our elders were fine men. Those are good guys. But he just chronically ran them down. He couldn't figure out, when his boys graduated from school, why his boys wanted nothing to do with the church. It didn't take a wise head to figure that one out. He had poisoned them. Absolutely poisoned them. And then somehow he expected them to honor and revere what he had talked down and talked down and talked down. It's not going to happen. Do you present them an example of courteousness and politeness to others? Do they see you open the door courteously for somebody? Do they see you when you're sitting in a waiting area and an older person comes in? Do they see you get up and offer them a seat? Do they see you addressing other people respectfully? Brother, that's absolutely critical. They are going to learn from you. They're going to learn from how you conduct yourself, what you say. And if they see you treat other people with respect, I don't care if it's a clerk in a store, if it's a waiter or a waitress, I don't care if it's a serviceman who comes by to work on a refrigerator, I don't care who it is. If they see you model treating others with the respect that you should, they'll walk in your shoes because they're seeing a proper example. And if they don't, then don't be surprised at the consequences that go with that. And also, we teach our children to respect others by commanding and demanding our children's respectful conduct toward us as parents, toward the elderly, and toward those who are in authority. I believe their language should be respectful. I cringe when I hear a child speak disrespectfully to their parents. I've told the story before about when I was just a little guy. And my cousin's coming over and playing with us. And when it came time for us to be called to go in the house, my aunt came to the back door and she called on my two cousins to come in. And I'll never forget my older cousin turning to her and saying, "Oh, shut up." Now that would have been a death sentence for me. You know that. And I knew that. And that's why I still remember it after all this time. "No, you girls, come on." The other turned. "Oh, shut up, Mom. We're playing." My aunt turns to my mom and says, "Isn't that cute? Did you hear them say shut up?" They both spent time in prison. My aunt raised her grandson because her daughter, my cousin, couldn't raise him because she was in prison. They didn't respect anybody or anything. And look at the consequences that went with that. It wasn't cute. It wasn't sweet. It was a horrific mistake on her part, and she shortchanged them when she didn't teach them to respect her. Their language should be respectful. Their conduct should be respectful. The yes ma'ams and no ma'ams and yes sirs and no sirs mean a lot. They say a lot. And they need to be retaught and repracticed today. Because if we will raise our children to respect other people, and in particular, to respect God, okay? To respect their parents, to respect the elderly, and to respect those in positions of authority, as I said in the first lesson, we will have given our children a huge, huge push in the right direction. You can look at any study and it'll tell you that children who are blessed to come from an intact home and children who are raised to function in society and respect others are automatically moving toward what most people in this world would consider a successful life. Because they know how to interact with their peers, they know how to interact with their superiors. Bless your children by teaching them respect. It is absolutely critical in this day and age. This morning, if you're ready to express your respect for God and His love for you by giving your life to Him, as you become His child, as you are born again in the waters of baptism, if we can help you in any way in your walk with the Lord, we would encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing.
We fall down, we lay our crown at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. And we cry, holy, holy, holy. And we cry, holy, holy, holy. And we cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. We fall down, we lay our crown at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of mercy and love at the feet of Jesus. And we cry, holy, holy, holy. And we cry, holy, holy, holy. And we cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lamb. Holy, 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 no